So welcome to the first special delivery brought to you by Master Sergeant King and I. I'm Master Sergeant Melisa Witter, and I'm the Pentagon Bolling Career Assistance Advisor. The intent of these is really, we're going to try to do it about twice a month, Sergeant King.
Yes.
And really it's open to anyone. So Chief Wesley, thank you so much for being the first person to talk to us this afternoon about diversity and some personnel programs. But if there's something you're passionate about or you're the subject matter expert about and it's relevant and falls under our umbrella, please contact Master Sergeant King or I. Next week, we'll also, we're going to have a resiliency one. So we'll have two speakers that are going to talk about different things at the same time. So Sergeant King, if you want to go ahead and add anything, and then Chief Wesley will be over to you.
No, just introduce myself. My name is Master Sergeant Julius King. I'm the Career Assistance Advisor for Joint Base Andrews. So for those who don't know us, thank you for being here, right? Thank you guys for giving us your time and being a part of a very important, sometimes difficult conversation. And a special thank you to Chief Wesley for stepping into this, right? And being here with us and offering us your wisdom and your insights as we move forward today. So without further ado, Chief Wesley.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you, Sergeant King, and thank you, Sergeant Witter, for this opportunity to talk with the team about diversity and policy, right? And I like to say diversity and inclusion. The timing, this was not planned, right? For everything to happen that led up to this, but it was perfect, right? Everything just lined up. And so we're here, and I want this to be a dialogue, right? Not a monologue. I don't want to be the only one talking. I know that's going to be a little bit difficult, but please feel free to raise your hand, chime in, and be a part of the conversation, because that's what it's all about, being a part of the conversation. So diversity. What is diversity? So I'll start there. You are diverse. We're all diverse. But sometimes we don't know what that diversity is, because we've been with us. You've been with you your whole life. So you don't know how you may come across to some people, but you know of your experiences, and you know how you were raised and everything that's been poured into you. So I want to set the stage by starting with you, for you to get to know who you are. And then as you explore that, as we continue the conversation here, I want you to be mindful as we discuss these certain areas, who you are and how you're responding, how you're feeling about the different roads we're going to go down in this conversation, right? So the other day, I was in my car, and I've had my car for a while, but I know for a fact that I don't use all the gadgets in my car. I don't know everything that my car can do. I just needed to do what I needed to do when I needed to do it, right? Get in, turn the radio on, it drives. It's not making a noise. I'm good, right? Everything else, what's working on the inside, not really concerned about it, right? But then you go to looking at your owner's manual. If you're sitting at that light too long, or you're at the dealership for a little bit too long, you start looking at that owner's manual and you're like, I didn't know my car could do that. I didn't know that. Well, I want you to take your owner's manual out. Your owner's manual to yourself. And I want you to ask yourself, do I know who I am? Your quick first answer is, of course I do. Well, we're going to do a little exercise for me to see and for you to see who you really are, right? Who you are. And as we go through this exercise, I want it to make sense to you. And when I say make sense, I want it to pay attention to your 5 senses, right? You got your sight, your hearing, your feeling, you're smelling, and you're tasting. What are you going through as I call out these just random things I'm going to call out, right? So first, New York. A red Solo cup. New England Patriots. Dallas Cowboys. Gotta say my Atlanta Falcons. Jordan. Pink. Apple. DSD. Gun. Divorce. Roller coaster. Work. Quarantine. A fat person. A tall person. A fine person. An expensive car. I'm gonna stop right there. Now, some of you, as I was calling out those things, if you're like me, you probably have a picture in your head or a thought or a memory. Something came and touched your senses. Something came and you got a memory, you pictured someone, you pictured something. Where did that come from? Why did you think that? And with the different people that we have on the line, I think it's safe to say that we probably didn't think the same thing. But I want to hear what some of you thought about. When I said New York, what did you think about? Some of you, I want you to chime in and tell me what you thought about when I said New York.
Attitude and Timberland boots.
Attitude and Timberland boots. Okay, who else?
I thought of Times Square.
Times Square.
Yeah, I just thought about city. I know it's a whole state, but I never think of it as a state. I'm like, oh, there's other parts. So my apologies to anyone who's from other parts.
Got you. Okay.
I thought about the Alicia Keys song.
Alicia Keys. Okay. All right. All right. When I said Atlanta Falcons, what did you think about?
The greatest team from the greatest state in the free world. Thought about my tattoos, man.
I thought about the greatest joke in the Super Bowl.
Man, don't bring that up. It's too soon.
That's a
That's
very sensitive subject.
It's gonna always be too early for that.
Always.
All right. When I said divorce, what'd you think about?
Messy.
Messy. Okay.
Sometimes it's the best thing.
Okay. All right. So as we're talking about these things, right, as we're going into the conversation, I want you to stay mindful of how you're responding, how you're reacting to certain things, right? Certain words, certain topics that we're going to talk about, because that's very key. It's very key. Because you are who you are. And I often hear a lot of times that we call airmen weapon systems, and we are. But you are the unique weapon system that we have in this military. And how you operate, how you do the mission that we called you to do is different from anybody else. So we have to find out what makes you tick. And when you're on someone's team, what are they getting when they have you on their team? What diversity do you bring to the team? I use myself as an example, and I want you to be mindful once again, when I call out these things to you, I want you to pay attention to how you're responding, right? If I'm on your team, you have someone who is 5'9", a chief. I'm a female. I'm a single parent. I ride motorcycles. I play basketball. I'm from Georgia. I'm personnel. I was an EPME instructor. I'm a Scorpio. And I've been divorced twice. Now, based on that limited information that I shared with you, what do you think you know about me? If I came over to your house, I'm gonna keep it simple. If I came over to your house, what would you cook for dinner? If I came over to your house for dinner, what would you cook? Somebody.
A downtown.
Catfish, macaroni and cheese.
Huh?
A southern meal.
Who said?
Somebody said, they said a southern meal.
A southern meal? Okay, what's a southern meal?
I know sweet tea included.
Absolutely. Greens, fried chicken, cornbread, candy yams, homemade mac and cheese. Yeah.
And what made you say that? What did you use of the? I mean, because you only got a little bit of information. You just gonna cook me some greens and some candy yams and cornbread and all of that. Based off of what? What took you down that road?
Because those are Southern staples. And so I think a lot of times people automatically associate Southern states with those types of foods because those are Southern staples.
Okay, all right. Who else? I heard somebody say macaroni and cheese.
I'm from Georgia, so
Yep. Okay.
we take pride in our macaroni and cheese. So yeah, well, you'd have to get some macaroni and cheese.
All right. Who else? I come over to your house. What you gonna cook for dinner? Come on, Adam.
I think it would just be like comfort food. So a lot of what everybody else listed, I want you to be comfortable when you're in my home. So and that's so for me, those foods, the chicken, the mashed potatoes, the meatloaf, or the greens, or that Southern Thanksgiving, that's comfort food, and I want you to feel like you're home, and that's home for me. And so that's what I'm gonna make.
Okay. Villarreal. Did I say that right? Villarreal.
Close enough, ma'am. Most people say B or Villarreal. I say Villarreal, but that's different. So for me, ma'am, I'm a little bit different. So I was brought up Hispanic, and I would, because you're a chief, because you're from a Southern area, because you've been in the military, because you have all these other things, I'm like, you're probably well-traveled. I've been around places. So the first thing I'd ask you would be, are you allergic to anything? Because I don't want to cook something, you know what I'm saying? And then I'm like, well, she's not going to eat it. So I would actually ask questions beforehand. And that's what I do when I have friends or family that I'm cooking for. So I would need more information personally.
That's good. That's a good one. Everybody else trying to get me fat, and they don't know. They trying to get me a EpiPen because they don't know if I'm lactose. Giving me all this macaroni and cheese and all this stuff. They just give me peanuts. So I'm over here and everything, right? Okay. Who else? One more person. What would you cook for me based on the information based on what you know about me? What would you cook? What would you make? How would you come up with that decision?
And so, JANNA, I would actually ask you what you like.
Okay.
So I'm not a big cook, so it probably wouldn't be me; it'd be my wife doing the cooking. But I'd ask you what you like if you had a preference or a favorite, and prep something like that for you. And I probably wouldn't ask about allergies. Being a medic, I probably should, but I wouldn't. But I would ask you what what's your favorite type of food? You know, if you like seafood, if you like Southern food, if you like good old steak and potatoes, whatever you like, and that's what I would attempt to cook for you.
Okay. Now those were some great responses. None of them were wrong or right. We don't even go in there, right? We're just, how are you thinking about some of the decisions that you make? Some of you just, hey, I know she liked greens and cornbread. Hey, macaroni and cheese. Whatever you cook, you better have her some sweet tea, right? Diabetes. Yes, that's what we have. Someone said, hey, she used well-traveled. I ask you what you want. Are you allergic to anything? And then we have a medic who should just know better, but he just gonna go and give me the peanuts, right? And he said something very key, right? I don't cook. So it's my wife who's gonna have to cook. So I need to make sure that she's gonna be able, she's good with whatever you decide. Yeah, all right. So now let's take this in the workplace. You have an airman coming into your organization. This airman comes from Illinois. They do not have a family history of, they don't have a military background. First one in their family to come into the military. Just kind of joined because, you know, they wanted to travel the world or get an education, right? Because those are some of the reasons why we have airmen join. This person is 19 years old, male. They come into your organization as a, and I'm gonna stick with a cop. I'll just say a cop, right? Not a guaranteed job. They just kind of got put into being a cop. How would you receive that person? What are some things that you would look at, you would take into account as you acclimate this former civilian and mold them to be an airman? We're still with the diversity. We got to figure out who you are, because during that transition, you're doing a lot of, hey, you know, we just got you from home and we're bringing you in fresh out of the society. We done put you through BMT, tech training, and now you're at your first duty station. What are you thinking about that airman? What are you seeing in that airman? Do you see a group? Do you take the group approach, or do you take the individual approach? The group approach would be, or do you take both, right? The group approach is to, well, you got your in-processing checklist. We're going to get you settled, put you in the dorms, and those types of things, right? How do you choose who that member's supervisor is going to be? Once again, thinking about, and I'm not going to give you the answer. The whole purpose of this is for you to know who you are and for you to get in touch with your owner's manual so that you can see how you work, how you're thinking. What's your first thought when you see that airman and you see a tattoo on them? That's a little questionable. Maybe it's a tattoo, it looks like a gang symbol to you. How do you handle that? Do you ask the person? Do you make them cover it up? Like, how do you think you're going to respond, right? Now, think about yourself when you came in. When I joined the military, I was 21 years old, from Georgia. I'd never really been anywhere else. First female in my family to join the military. First time really leaving home. First duty station was off at Air Force Base, Nebraska. What do you think the Air Force got in me when I arrived at my first duty station? What are some things? I had never been on an airplane before, right? So didn't really know how to navigate the whole airport thing, getting from home and working that. But there's an assumption sometimes that airmen, our first term airmen, they ought to know. And we keep that ought to know at every rank a person assumes, right? At every rank. One of the things that I told you was that I'm a chief. So in your mind, what are you thinking I ought to know? You ought to know better. Where is that coming from? And why do you think that? Is it groupthink? Or do you know that I received this training? Are you taking into account my background? What else are you taking into account? Or do you have a biased automatic thought, right? Because when we say bias, it's just an automatic thought towards something. Usually when we talk about diversity, we go to the usual, the regs. And I call it race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. And those are the ones that we typically go to. But diversity is tall and wide. So as I call out some other aspects of diversity, once again, I want you to think about what you're thinking. And then I want to open it up for a minute to get your feedback on some things, right? So I said race and ethnicity. We have age, generation. In your workplace, what's the age range in your workplace? What's the generation like? How many generations are in your workplace? Religion, gender, transgender, gay, bisexual, lesbian, your socioeconomic status. How does that play into you being an airman? If you're on the lower echelon and you grew up a bit poor, it could impact how you see the rest of the world. Your access to things, your educational level. We have airmen who come in, you can have your GED when you come in, but you also have airmen who come in, and I'm sure our CAAs may know this, you have airmen who come in who have degrees, who have been working in corporations before they join, right? What do you want to say? Oh, I heard somebody's mic come up.
No, that was mine. I hit it on accident. I was just in agreement. Like I just recently had somebody come through FTAC. She was, I think she is now turned 41. She was on the South Korean Olympic swimming team. She has a master's degree, and then she was on the Olympic planning committee when the Olympics were in Seoul. Like, and she brand new airman. And she only came in the military because she was denied a job, even though she was the most qualified, but somebody with less qualifications was a vet, and they got the job before her. They had the preference, or they had priority. So she joined the military to accomplish this. She was like, I joined it to serve my country, and I never wanted to not get a job because I hadn't served my country. And that was it. But to me, more than I am, I was like, man, I just watched the Olympics. So, yeah.
And what was her rank?
You said what was her rank?
Mm-hmm.
Shoots. A1C.
Okay.
Yep, she airman first class, just came in. So
now
yeah.
Think about what we think about when you see an A1C, their rank, right? You see their rank and they give you information, and if they tell you something you don't want to hear, what are you thinking? Are you thinking 41-year-old, Olympics, master's degree? And why is that? Take it a step further. Think what you think, and then take it a step further, right? Because this is all a part of who you are. Your children, your dependency status, your dependent status. If you have kids, if you don't have kids. That's a part of your diversity. That's a part of your story. Disabilities, that's a part of your story. Whether you have the disability or you have a dependent with disability, how does that factor in how you see someone or that person who has a disability? Your marital status, is that a factor for the decisions you have to make regarding this person? If you have someone that's been divorced twice, if you look at my records, you will see that I was first Airman Shelley, and then I became Sergeant Wesley, and then I became Sergeant Dorville, Chief Dorville, and then now Chief Wesley. If you look back through my records, you can find out if I've been married, divorced, or typically name changes. What do you think about someone who's been divorced? And I want you to have these honest conversations with yourself. What does that say about that person to you, in your opinion? And to take another side of the conversation, who typically changes their name when they get married? Is it the male? Do both people change their names? If you're in a same-sex marriage, who changes their name? Is it possible that you could have a male who's been divorced just as much, but you can't tell that by their records because there's no name change? But there's something very blatant about a name change. And does that impact how you see that person now? Right? Once again, there's no right, no wrong. I want you to get to know who you are and why you think the way you think. Going on to some other diverse aspects of someone. Their skill, their hobbies. I'm a personnelist. Usually when I walk into a room and say I'm personnel, the first thing I get, what do you think I get? Hey, can you get me an assignment? Hey, I got my re-enlistment paperwork, or I got a CMS case open. Can you find out, so everybody thinks personnel. We all know each other and we all have access to the same systems and we all do the same thing. Why do you think that? Whatever you think about personnel, what do you think about defenders? What do you think about someone in the medical career field? Intel, our new Space Force, special warfare. What do you think you're going to see? And then when I say Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, what pops in your head when I say our sister service, the branches of our sister service? Marine, is there an image that pops in your head? Navy, the Army. Once again, who are you? Do you know who you are? And do you know why you think the things that you think? Language. Who on here can speak different languages? I can say a few words in some other different languages, but today's language, right? What is today's language like?
Through text.
Through text. We use emojis, right? We use pictures, GIFs, and all those things, right? That's how we talk now. If you show my grandma some of the things that we use, how we communicate now, do you think she understands some of that? Probably not, right? So going back to the generations that you have in your work center and your preference in how you speak, how does that impact the dynamics in your work center? What do you know about other generations? Are you taking that into consideration when there's a change coming down the pipe and you have someone who is, no, they're stuck where they are on the topic and they don't want to change. Do you take into consideration their generation, their age, or whatever else they have going on in their life? And then we have a whole AFI on physical appearance, right? Dress and personal appearance. Have you ever seen someone outside of work and you looked at them for a while and it's like, I know you, but you don't recognize them? And then when they tell you who they are, it's like, I work in the cubicle right next to you. But because of how they look in their civilian clothes, they look a little bit different, right? We're seeing this now in quarantine. You know, if you can get a good enough background in somebody's house or see what they look like first thing in the morning. And some of y'all done lost some respect for a couple of people, like, okay, you know, I didn't know you was looking like that, right? You're looking at people a little bit different. So physical appearance, how does that impact how you see yourself and how you see other people? Another diverse aspect is our schedules. Right now, most services to our airmen happen during what time frame? During the hours of what? 7:30, 4:30. We have some, but we have shift workers. But if you go over to the MPF, can our night shift, can they come over and get the same service from our MPF, from finance? Some offices in medical, depending on, you know, the capabilities of your medical facility that's on base, if it's a clinic or if it's a full up medical facility, a hospital. But what services are usually open at what time? So our schedules, that's a diverse aspect, right? So you have someone that's a shift worker. What do they have to do in order to do the same thing a 7:30 to 4:30 worker has to do in that same window, but they just got off shift and now they have to come to the MPF? And the one thing that I know my fellow, my brothers and sister airmen don't like to do is wait. So this young man, young woman, they done worked all night, and now you tell them to come over and you tell them to wait in the waiting room without realizing that they just came off shift. What do you think that conversation, that interaction is going to be like, right? So as I went down through all of those things, I want to take a minute to pause. And I want to open up the floor to see if anybody has anything to share about anything I've said so far regarding diversity, your diversity, what you bring to the table, and the other little, you know, the short list of diverse aspects I've laid out already. Who would like to share anything?
So Chief, I'll start, right? So I want to say for me, right, as we talk about diversity, one thing that I was really kind of, I don't want to say I wasn't very mindful of when I first came into the military is being from the South, I wasn't aware that other cultures did not experience racism, right? So when I first came in, like the subtleties, and sometimes they're not that subtle, things that happen to us, I felt I tended to brush them off a bit more because I knew, like, I already knew that I was going to be at a disadvantage, and that worked against me two ways, right? Some people would have legitimate problems, like, hey, I'm from California. I ain't grow up like that. Like, I'm not used to people acting with a little attitude. And for me, I'm like, it's just the way it is. So having to identify that, like, you know what, some people really didn't grow up like that. So the things that bothered them, it probably should have bothered me, but it didn't. And then from the other end of that, like when I first came in the military, I was called the N-word by a senior NCO. Right. And although I was upset and I probably reacted poorly, when I said something about it, I was like, I didn't think I would experience that in the military. And most people were just like, I didn't know folks experienced that at all. So having to be mindful sometimes that you're in a position that you need to educate people on what's going on. And then even though you may be used to something, you need to make sure that you take into consideration that other people haven't seen the same things that you have. And when they voice those concerns, taking that in consideration and then coming at them from a different perspective. Hey, I grew up seeing people, if you grew up seeing people get shot every day and it's my first time seeing somebody get shot, I can't just be like, get over it. I got to take into consideration you ain't never seen somebody get shot before. So those are the type of things as we talk about diversity, we just may think about like against me, but what things have happened and molded you that you become desensitized to what people find very, very offensive that you just don't view it the same anymore.
No, that's good. Who else has something to share?
Well, I honestly had a couple similar situations to Sergeant King. Literally my first day in the military, I was told two things. That one, I'm expendable, which, coming into a service where you're told you're amongst the best and you're the 1% of the country who raised their right hand, and then being told I'm expendable and we can move on without you, didn't really give me the warm and fuzzies to want to give 100% of my best quality. But I was also told that and this is all by a senior NCO at the time, that I had two things against me that meant I had to work 2 and 3 times as hard because I'm Black and I'm an airman. So it did two things to me. It kind of made me feel like, what did I really get into? But also it motivated me to work 2 and 3 times as hard. And it was kind of my underlying basis for everything that I've done for the last 12 years to give more than my best, because I felt like I had to, just to be able to stay competitive.
Now I wanna stretch that out a little bit because I hear that often, right, from a specific group, and it's usually people of color who say that. I grew up, I was told that I have to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard. Those are the seeds that were planted. And so now when you come into an organization, you said something very key. You weren't expecting the Air Force to treat you that way, to say that to you, because you had a perception and you had a vision or understanding of what you thought the Air Force was. Now, do you have family in the military?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you're getting that from, hey, I grew up in this thing. I didn't expect people to talk like this and to say these types of things from me, because in your mind, hey, the Air Force, this is a profession. We don't do that here. It's kind of like getting a bad sandwich from Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A, getting bad service from Chick-fil-A. Like, that doesn't even go together, right? Chick-fil-A is always on their game, always professional, always give you good service, always give you a good product, and they're professional. So to see that, how do you, because at some point you have to be a supervisor. You're going to have a rater-ratee relationship. You're going to be in somebody's supervisory chain, right? How do you navigate through that with those types of seeds planted in your mind? And do you realize that you could be the only one thinking that? No one else is thinking that, right? This is something, do you recognize that you brought this to the party? Nobody knows and nobody is thinking that of you but you. But when you have been, your roots are still where it's all connected, right? When you pick up a plant and you repot it, it still has those same roots. So you've been picked up and now you have been repotted in the Air Force, but you still have those roots. How do we get after that? And nobody's roots are, I won't use the word right or wrong, right? Because that's where the conversation usually gets a little bit shaky and emotional, because somebody has to be right. Somebody has to be wrong. When in fact, my view is we're just on different parts of the spectrum. You think the way you think, I think the way I think. And can those two views exist and we still work together, right? Right now, we're still on the airman. You as that airman. This Air Force cannot move and will not move without the people. So how do we get the people, the majority of the people, the airmen, to be what our uniform says we should be? United. We are the United States Air Force. So before we can be joint, we need to work on the united piece. So how do we mesh all of that? And how do we take that into consideration? Once again, of just planting seeds for you to think about, right? Who else would like to share something?
Hey, Chief. This is Chief Hayes down in San Antonio.
Hey.
Really, hey, how you doing? Good to see
Good.
you. I want to throw something out there because we're bringing up, of course, race is always is an issue, and it's a talking point, and it's something that we're always gonna have to be cognizant of and correct people. And you mentioned, how we're raised. Some people, how we're raised, we can't really control that. So I definitely believe that we're not born to be racist, bigots, or whatever it might be. We're the people that were raised that way in a lot of ways. So we have to try to get that, help to educate them and help them understand that they have biases that are incorrect and wrong. But I wanted to bring one up that affected me as a airman. Well, actually, before I was an airman, I was actually in depth, and we did a trip to Arnold Air Force, Air Force Base. It's a reserve base, just so we could see what a base looks like. A lot of us had never been around the military, and I brought my my fiance, and we were all excited, 17, 18-year-old kids, and we get on the bus with the recruiters and, pick some recruiters up on the way at other detachments. And the first thing they did when they introduced us, one of the guys looked at me, and you could tell he was from up north, the way he carried himself, the way he talked. And he was like, "Oh, so that's your sister?" And when I said, it was my fiance, and I was kind of thrown back because I'd never heard that, and of course I've heard it many times since then, being from Alabama, right? And also when I first came in, I had people actually say, "Well, you're ignorant because you're from Alabama. You guys don't, aren't educated and whatever else." So I actually changed. I didn't realize I was doing it, but I actually changed my accent over time where I didn't sound as Southern, so people would respect me more and not automatically assume I'm uneducated. And I think it happens in so many different lights. We have biases we don't even realize until we really start delving into it.
Thank you, Chief Hayes, for sharing that. Now, why did he ask you if that was your sister?
Because I was from Alabama. They say, "Oh, it must be your sister then, or your cousin," right? I hear that all the time. Did y'all not have that issue in Georgia?
No, but there's somebody, maybe
that's Alabama thing.
No, maybe there's somebody who's logged in who didn't connect the two, right? Like, I don't get it. I don't get what asking him if, but there are certain things that you just grow up hearing, right? You grow up hearing that people from down south are slow. they marry their cousins, you know.
Mhm.
It's still, and the race footprint where I'm from is still a little thick. It's still a little thick. We actually have it's written in stone, actually, in a busy part of town, where it says, on top of a building, where it says colored section only, right? And when I went home, I think it was 2 years ago, I went home and I saw it, and I had to do a double take. And I couldn't believe that that was still up there, because we had renovated downtown. And if you've been downtown Macon, it's really not downtown, right? There's no building down there you're gonna jump off of and do any damage to yourself. It's really small. But having left my hometown and going back, that bothered me that was there, because I knew the impact, the seeds that were being planted unconsciously when those children see that type of language, right? And you don't know what's impacting you and how much is going to impact you. But those are the types of things that I saw in my hometown, and some of that still has not changed. And some of you in your hometowns, where you're from, or if you grew up and you had a little bit of experience in moving around, maybe you're a military brat or what have you, or your life circumstances caused you to grow up in different areas. That's a part of your roots. And now you are a weapon system in the United States Air Force. And regardless of where you're from, who you are, we are airmen. Your first name becomes your rank, and we know your last name. And we put you in a uniform and tell you to get information. And we have these books and we have this guidance that's supposed to help you as you progress in your career, right? And that's where we get into the policy piece. But before I get into the current policy, how did we get here? Were we always here? There was a point in time where I could not join the military. One, because of my gender. And then there was another reason, because of my skin color. So laws had to be passed in order for me to, for barriers to be removed, for me to join without any friction, for me to just walk up to a recruiter and just join. And there'll be no waivers, no qualms about it, right? Laws had to be passed for that to happen. Laws had to be passed for me to vote. And when I say me vote, I mean people, African Americans. Laws had to be passed, right? Excuse me. I'm not going to get too far back into our history, but we know how our country started, how the U.S. started. We know some of the ugly things that happened, and all of that is in our roots. Moving forward, because I hear people say all the time, we're 2020, we're in 2020. We shouldn't be doing things like that. We shouldn't be acting like that. But you have to realize, roots, if you don't pluck them completely up, things are going to continue to grow. And all of the, I think I picture, when I think about this, I picture a vineyard. And I'm thinking about all this huge field of grapes, right? All of the grapes are not going to be edible. You're going to have some rotten grapes that grow on the vine. There are some people in this world who are just genuinely full of exclusion and hate and things like that. It is what it is. Do we want it to be that way? No. Are we born that way? That's another discussion, right? Because then we're going to get into a conversation, well, are you born gay and all that stuff? That's not where I want to have this conversation. But the bigger part is, how did we get here? We weren't always the United States Air Force. Where did we come from? We came from the Army, right? And who started that? You know, we hear about the Wright brothers, but who was in competition with the Wright brothers? You know, they were bicycle shop owners. They were the underdog, but they ended up being setting the foundation for what we have now called the Air Force. When you put policy in place that excludes people, intentionally or unintentionally, at some point, it's going to have to be addressed. And why is it going to have to be addressed? Because our society is changing. What you see today wasn't necessarily a thought, or it wasn't as prominent back in previous generations. And what I mean by that is same-sex marriages. How big of a conversation was that? How big of a public conversation was that? In the workplace conversation was that many moons ago. But now we talk about that. And so some people have to change their language, how they talk about things, because you have a female that comes into your work center, she's in processing, and she says, I'm married, and oh, what does your husband do? Well, my wife is a nurse, or my wife is EOD. And now we have to change how we talk. Instead of saying husband, wife, making that assumption, because we typically say, hey, someone's married, you're a male, you got to be married to a female. We know now, because of today's dynamics, that's not always the case. When we talk about someone with a disability, my son is 18 years old and he's on the autism spectrum. Now, when I share that with you, some of you have met my son and been around him and all of that. What do you think about someone who is on the autism spectrum? What picture comes into your head? Someone, an elderly person. Oh, someone wants to share?
Oh, I'm sorry, Chief. Sergeant Witter. I was just going to say that when you ask what comes to my head, it's changed, because when I was younger, there was only one picture of an autistic person that was kind of like known in society. But as I've gotten older and we've learned more about disabilities and things, sometimes you just don't even know, right? And so one of the insensitive things that we've adapted is we may say things like about a coworker, oh, that person's on the spectrum. That's not nice, guys, right? And so more than likely, if someone said that in front of you, that may change how you view that person. And I'm not saying, but, you know, it's being aware of what things used to look like to what education does and how it changes our awareness of things. So that's all I was going to say, is that when I was younger, I thought it was one thing. And I think also adults have a tendency to speak on things they don't know. So they would just label people that weren't even, you know, that. But now as a parent also with a special needs son, different story, definitely have learned a lot more, you know, about that whole arena. So we only know what we know.
Yeah. And I you said you grew. You said, you know, back then you recognize at some point you thought a different way about some autism spectrum, but now because you've been educated, enlightened, informed, you think differently. And that's what it's going to take in order for people to think differently and retrain how they think about certain people. But in order to even have that conversation, that person has to be able to recognize and accept that they think that way about people, you know? And you have to have that hard conversation with yourself. And what I mean by that is if you see someone who is overweight, if you see someone, what do you think about people who are overweight? What does that say to you about them, right? And once again, diversity is not new. The very first story of diversity was once upon a time, there was a man named Noah who built an ark. And he had to bring 2 of each kind of animal on the ark. Now, this is not getting into the religion piece of it, but it's if you know the story of Noah and the ark, you knew he brought 2 of each kind of animal. Now, you have a diverse atmosphere, right? All these animals, different animals. What do you have to think about as you are in this space with all these different animals? Because you got your nocturnal animals. You have animals that you have to keep away from each other, right? You have animals who are thinking certain things about other animals. If we start going and giving animals voices and all this stuff, what do you think the hyenas are saying? What do you think?
I wanted them to fall out so I can eat them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who do you have to keep away from each other? Who needs to, what are you doing with the birds, right? And somebody asked me one time, was like, well, what do you do? Where do you keep the fish? I'm like, why would you have the fish in the ark when there's water outside? They would just stay out there. But see, that person needed me in that moment because they really thought that you could bring the fish in. Why would you bring the fish in? You keep the fish out. That's where the water is. And look at, yep, Sergeant King just got it. Because you was going to bring the fish in the ark, weren't you?
No, but I can understand why they would ask the question, right? Because if I can only bring 2 of each, then what you do with the rest of, like, hey, if I can only bring 2 salmon, and it is salmon, then what I do with the rest of the salmon? How I get rid of them? I see where they were thinking I got to come to them to bring them to me. Now, I understand they got to stay in the water, but you got to go to them and bring them over. I'm just saying.
Okay. And see, this is why you have to have diverse perspectives at the table. I had someone making a shadow box one time. And you know how you make the person's shadow box and it goes from rank to rank? And this person started out as an airman basic. And so this person was going E1, E2. He spent an hour looking for the E1 rank. They don't have any E1 ranks at clothing sales. Okay. You know that's not a strike, right? So that's why you have to have someone else at the table besides you, besides someone that looks like you, besides someone that's in your same AFSC. Because when you start writing policy and you start establishing a culture in your work center, that's what's going to take hold. Right. Right now we have some policies in place and we're working on a few policies that have not been implemented just yet. Some of them, you know about these policies, and some of them, I'll give you a little peek under the tent, right? The most recent one, right, is the pilot, the height change requirement for pilots. Any of you seen that in the recent headlines? And the headline goes, Air Force removes height requirement to attract more women. When you read that, when you hear that, Air Force removes height requirement to attract more women. And it's directed towards pilots. What's going through your mind just from reading that headline? What are you thinking? And then I'll share with you what I'm thinking.
It kind of gives the perception that women are short.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of get a perception that if I'm a short dude that want to be a pilot, that I can't.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That women's rights really don't matter unless it benefits us.
Okay. That yes. You remove that height requirement. But how did the height requirement get there in the first place? Because I would like to think, because of how the aircraft, is made. But something has changed, and now we have to change policy to adjust to the diversity that we now have in our force. Because when you're talking about diversity and policy, we have to think differently now because our population is different. It looks different. Our society is different. What couldn't happen yesterday is you see it happening now, right? So we have to adjust accordingly, or else we're going to lose out on talent. So diversity is about talent management as much as it is about professional development and how you navigate through the Air Force, how you progress through the Air Force, all the way up to retention, all the way up until you retire. Those decisions and policies have to be in place to account for you and other fellow airmen, right? Another, let's take when the OCPs rolled out. That was a big change. That was a huge change. And it still is for some people. For those of you who were impacted or knew someone that was impacted by the pregnancy, the maternity OCPs, that was a conversation. Did anybody have any conversations about the maternity OCPs? Because did they roll out at the same time as the regular OCPs? There was a delay there. And there were some people who were upset by that because it sends the message that you didn't, the Air Force didn't account for airmen who were pregnant. And that's when messaging comes into play. What's in the messaging? How do we address that we did take pregnant airmen into account? And someone explained this very, very well in one of the other presentations that I did. What does OCP stand for? Somebody tell me. We're not going to go until somebody tell me. Google it. Somebody's like, oh, I thought it was OCP. It stands for something. I know somebody on this line.
Operational camouflage pattern.
Operational camouflage pattern. For those of you who are still WAPS testing, y'all better get that one right. Operational. What if we told those who were concerned about the delayed rollout of the maternity OCPs was because operational, it was a phased approach. And when you're rolling out an operational uniform, it was not to say that pregnant airmen are not a priority. It was just that when you roll out the uniform, the operational piece, when you tear it out, those who needed maternity uniforms could wait a little bit longer versus those who are special warfare airmen who needed the uniform ahead of time. So we get them fitted for their uniform now, right? But maternity uniforms were never not in the conversation, if that makes sense, right? So it matters how you message a rollout of a program, okay? Assignments. We touched on this a little bit yesterday. And you may have heard, when you are considering an assignment, what are you thinking about? What drives you to volunteer for an assignment? And what policies do we have in place now that unintentionally excluded a group of airmen because of how the policy is written? And we like to say we don't assign, you know, we don't have those policies in place that discriminate against anyone. And that's definitely what we try to put into place. But if you don't have the right people at the table, that's an unintentional consequence that could happen, and it impacts airmen and their families, right? So when we rolled out same-sex marriage, right? When we repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and we allowed same-sex marriages, for me and my work center at the time, this impacted assignment policies. Because although the United States and certain places allowed this, we don't just PCS in the CONUS, right? We have to PCS OCONUS. So what if those other countries and those other destinations that we PCS to, they don't recognize that? Or we are putting airmen in harm's way because we put them in a place where they can't get medical care or whatever legal care because that country or that place does not recognize same-sex marriages. So those are things that we have to take into play, taking this into consideration when we're writing policy. And that's why sometimes policy takes so long. For some of you who have been around a little bit long, like I have, we now have the childbirth pregnancy separation. When I first joined earlier in my career, you know, the childbirth policy was if you got pregnant and you wanted to separate because you didn't know if you could be a parent and an airman at the same time, and you wanted to apply to separate, you had to make that decision before you gave birth, and you had to separate before you gave birth. Now we have a policy in place. Do you know what the policy is? Who knows what that policy is? The pregnancy separation policy.
I don't know the number of it, but I do know that you have up to a year to make your decision. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and I've actually had an airman get out on with that, and she went through her maternity leave and everything, and afterwards she'd been back at work for a little while, and then she was just like, no, I can't do that. And I thought it was perfect because sometimes, like right before, you're going to think, I don't want to do this, and you get out, and it might be a mistake.
Yes.
Or, you know, but some people need to actually come back to work, see how it works, and know, like, you know what, I don't want to be away from my child, or like, this is just not something I know I can maintain, especially if we're talking about single parenting, right?
Yeah.
That might be something where you're like, I want to move back home, pursue school, and be close to the family. So I thought it was awesome.
Yes, and that's exactly why the policy was changed, to give airmen time to see if they really can handle both without having to make that assumption or guess at it. It gives them that 1 year window to actually live it and see. And some airmen who probably would have separated if the old policy was the only policy that remained in place, that we still have them. They continue to serve because we extended that window and we gave them an opportunity to actually live it out. Now, with that particular policy, it wasn't a cushy feel type thing. It was definitely the right thing to do, definitely the right direction. And it's about talent, because women in the workforce at large, right, are leaving the workplace in higher numbers than males. And if, as we progress in our careers, women tend to leave the military, leave the Air Force quicker, and in higher numbers, more so than males. And those reasons tend to be around, they're associated with family. That's not to say that men don't love their family and value their families. It's just that women will be quicker to hey, pull the plug and say, it's time to separate. I've seen it happen many times in my circle of friends, where my fellow sister will pull the plug and her spouse will continue on with their career, right? So we have to go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask a question, right? Like, as we talk about that type of stuff, has it ever been looked at, especially for male-to-male families, giving males that option too, right? So like, let's say I'm a security forces member married to who doesn't really deploy, like physical therapy tech, right? Because they don't really deploy that much. But maybe the physical therapy person is the wife who's going to be giving birth, and maybe the security forces member is the father, whose deployment cycle is crazy. So instead of saying, well, we'll just give her the option, maybe she wants to continue to serve and it's better for the male to get out. Has it ever been looked at, right? Because especially sitting in this seat now, I've seen a lot of male members be like, hey, I got to get out because I deploy too much, and we're trying to start a family. So it can be looked, I know it's probably seen more in the female community that we're losing that talent, but on the opposite end, we're losing it too, because a lot of male members are like, I'm trying to be there and I can't.
Yeah. No, you bring up a very good point, and it is in discussion, right? And I won't say it's something we have to implement, because that's an option now already. Even though it's not spelled out in the AFI like that, if there's a place in the AFI for, some of you may have seen it, miscellaneous. And some of it is, I think one of the reasons is service incompatible with parenting or home life or personal, if in that situation that you described, the male airmen can apply to separate, and they can apply to separate under the miscellaneous. So it's not something we have to implement. It's already there. It's just that it's not spelled out in the AFI. And if it's not spelled out and it's not talked about a whole lot, then the assumption is that option doesn't exist. But maybe Chief Hayes is still on the line, but I know the CAAs who are on the line will help spread that message, because we will lose more talent if airmen feel like they don't have that option that you described. Okay, does that make sense? That
is perfect, and I wasn't even aware of that. So that's something moving forward I can let people know, because like I said, I have a lot of people who feel like I can't retrain. So once this separation is up, like I'm out, and I'm just like,
yeah.
I hate it to be that way, right? So like, the more options I feel that we present, sometimes that's a retainability tool, like to even know that the Air Force thought about you in that way. Sometimes people will be like, you know what, I have the option. Some people just want options. So I have the option. I'm gonna stay in, but it's great to know I have the option.
Yes.
So I think that's awesome. Thank you.
Now you will see the reasons in the childbirth pregnancy area. only addresses the female airmen. So for the miscellaneous, if you have a male who wants to separate and falls like in that situation, once again, that you described there, they would apply under the miscellaneous. Okay, but that is an option, and families need to know that that is an option. Okay, so that's where you all come in and say, Chief Wesley said that I can back it up in the AFI. Okay, and retraining is another huge one, right? Because we have airmen who are in an AFS that doesn't fit, that doesn't bring out the best in them. I was blessed enough to be in personnel, and that's where I'm supposed to be. I love what I do, and I love peopling. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. But we have some airmen who are not, we're not getting the best out of them because they would rather be doing, or we know, it's not a personal preference type thing. It's just that this person know they're supposed to be a cop. I had someone, on my team at Langley, and I said, hey, what is it that you wanted to do? Because she couldn't wait for her retraining window to come up. And she said, I want to be a cop. I want to be a cop so bad. And so we set up something for her to go over there and augmentee and see what it's really like. And she ended up retraining. So we got her in her passion position, and now she's doing great things for the Air Force. So those retraining is a huge one that we have to look at. And we continue to look at and try to get airmen and open up apertures and open up opportunities for airmen to be able to cross-train over into that career field that better fits their talents, right? Because if you're talent managing someone and you're trying to shoehorn them into that career field, that's just not a good fit. And then you run the risk of having airmen who want to, separate, who are, we're not getting a good return on investment because they're there, but they're not there, right? Who else has something to say? I thought I saw somebody's hand go up. Maybe I didn't. So I talked about the childbirth, pregnancy separation, the OCP rollout. This was mentioned on yesterday's call as well, because we have policies in place, but we also have cultures that are in place. And sometimes culture, regardless of the policy, culture will trump policy every single time. And it's not a culture to where it's just blatantly wrong, but it's not in line with the intent of the policy. And a good one, and I always hear it, is decorations. The AFI clearly states what it states regarding decorations. They are to be earned. They are to be, this person, whoever gets a decoration, it shouldn't be something that is just because they did their job. That's not a decoration. And the AFI is very specific on this. And it also says that we should not be giving someone a decoration based on rank. But what is our culture? What is our culture? When I was assigned stationed at Osan, I had a commander, and he lived this. If you came and you did your job, he appreciated you, and you got your Korean Tour medal. You didn't get a decoration. But if you came and you did something that was decoration worthy, you got your commendation medal, your achievement medal, or your MSM, or what have you. But he was not putting his name on something that was just making the donuts, just routine. You came over here, you did your work, because then that takes away from it takes away from the decoration, right? So where there are policies in place, sometimes there are even stronger cultures that are in place that don't adhere to the intent of the policy. And what do you do in an organization like that? What do you do? Because it's cyclical. Well, the AFI says this. Well, if I don't give this person a decoration, it's going to look bad on their board. It's going to look bad for their promotion. But if nobody starts to get some act right, we're going to stay in this cyclical state we're in of not meeting the intent of the AFI. When you PCS, a decoration is not automatic. When you PCA, if you've been at a base for a while and you PCA, a decoration is not automatic. It should mean something when you get a decoration. It shouldn't mean that you PCS. It should mean that you went somewhere and you kicked ass and you earned that decoration, not because you existed, but because you exceeded what you were paid to do anyway. So another
Chief, yeah, I do, right? So I know you talked about the getting a decoration like not based on rank, right? So what do you do? There's a lot of people out there that'll say, like, hey, I got a staff sergeant, or we'll go with one that's even closer. You got a tech sergeant that's performing all the duties of a master sergeant. And they'll say, no, you can't give them an MSM because they're a tech sergeant. Even though they're filling an E8 billet and they're doing that job and they are kicking ass and taking names. And people be like, no, just get them a comm. You should be happy with a comm. But then you get a master sergeant that is retiring. Right, been there for a year, retiring, and they were road, right, retired on active duty, and they'll be like, oh, well, we got to make sure we get him his decoration. So it's like, that's a slap in the face. It undermines everything, and it's a slap in the face. Like, what do you tell that person? Like, we're going to get you a comm, even though you were performing above and beyond, and you'll get taken care of on the back end, because that's what you always hear. And I know we say we got to change the culture, but we keep coming up in the same culture, and we know this. And then when you go to the board penalizes you, but then the same members that are on that board say, we got to change the culture.
Yeah.
So why is it that way? And then how do we truly change the culture? Because everybody's saying to change, but nobody's changing. And the people who can change keep saying we got to change. They ain't changing.
I think it's my peer group. It's my peer group. I hear Chief Wright say all the time, if we want something changed, we have to change it. And then in the environment I'm in, when he says that, it's a room full of chiefs. You all have a high expectation of your chief, and rightfully so. And if something is not going right with regards to decorations, then you need to talk with your chief, and we need to talk amongst ourselves to change that culture. We owe you all that. So that's on us. That's on us. It's nothing no one else is doing. And every time I have this conversation, I hear, yep, yes, this person didn't deserve decoration. Somebody has to step out and do it. Right? And I know we're getting short on time. Does anybody have to go? Because I have a few minutes. Do you all have to leave? Okay. I'm sorry. That snuck up on me real fast. But that's a short answer. There are no excuses. And I won't even try to blow smoke. That's on us. We have to change the culture.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you just saying that, right? Because I've had some chiefs when we have the conversation, literally like, you know what, you probably do deserve that MSM, but the commander, I don't think they're gonna push on this. And I'm like, well, I'll fight for it, right? Because my career, I'll fight for it. Are you willing to fight with me? And then instead of fighting with me, then they like, well, let me review your records again. Mm-hmm. And then they start like, hey, I had a Firewall 5, as we call it, EPR, and I won all these awards. But now you start picking away and like, well, what does your EPR really say? Does it really highlight what you did? And then look what you wrote in the declaration. It doesn't really reflect what you did. And I'm like, well, per the guidelines, I got to take basically what's in the EPR and transfer it to the deck. Mm-hmm. So there's no way for me to say there was a master sergeant stationed here and they put me in charge over him. They're like, oh, well, you got to find a way to put that in the deck. But I did it, so just speak to it.
So you talking about a specific person because you.
No, I mean, I'm just saying in general. I've had this come up. Had it come up. I had it come up, but like I see some people shaking their heads, so some people have had this come up. So it's not so much just me, right? I can speak to people's situation, and especially in this position, like I know I've been through it, right? So I tell people, sadly enough, I tell people the same thing, like, hey, I understand your frustration. Trust me, I have been there. This is the way you have to look at it. I eat that. I'm gonna be honest, like I tell them, hey, it's a crappy situation. This is what I was told, and this is how I move forward from it. Is it right? Hell no, it's not right, but I also can't change it. And even if I could change it on my end, it doesn't mean that, like, I might change it at the 11th FSS. It didn't happen at the 11th FSS, but let's say I change it at the 11th FSS, but I can't change it at the 11th CES. Right, like they're two different squadrons. So like I can only speak to, hey, this might happen, and this is how you move forward. We know it sucks, but yeah.
Let me get this. When you have these all calls, when you have your commander's calls, and when you have some high dignitary, at your unit, and the floor is open to questions. When questions are asked, right? Because sometimes people don't ask questions. These are the types of questions you need to put it right on Front Street. So I'm looking right. I don't know if I'm looking into the camera or whatever, but I'm saying this right now to my sisters and brother chiefs. This is on us. We have to change that culture. We have to change it. That's on us.
And the caveat that when it does come up in that large form, right, we can't, like, we all sat in the commander's call and somebody may have stood up and asked Chief Wright that magical question.
Yes.
And every leader is looking like, let's make sure we talk to that member after this and let them know this is not the forum for that. And we do it at any call. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
We do it at every call. We tell people to stand up and speak. And then as soon as they do, everybody's clapping. Great question. But that member got a meeting at 1500 that day to discuss asking questions in those forums.
Let me tell you, because that's been happening since I was a airman barely, right? And being blessed and privileged enough to have made it to chief. There are some things I never ever lose from my journey here. So when I see an airman that asks a question, a valid question that they were probably a little bit too hesitant or afraid to ask to their direct leadership, I kind of know what's going to happen, and I stay in contact. I keep my hands and my eyes and my ears open because that shouldn't happen. Whatever we're saying, and we're telling you all to ask the questions, be innovative. We have to get us to the Air Force we need. We can't be saying that on this side and then slapping you on this side because you do just that, right? So there are some leaders out there who will address what you brought up, that issue of the airmen suffering consequences to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Thank you so much. Chief Robinson has his hand up for a little bit. It keeps popping up and down. I'm not sure.
I know. I'm glad you recognize that. Yes. Go ahead.
All right, how y'all doing, everybody? Hey, so I know King was asking for a friend about that decoration that he knew a lot about. So I have a similar situation in Korea. I was there for a year, got along with the commander great, was doing big things, doing great things actually, and I actually kiked for another year. And the second commander that came in, I guess he wasn't feeling me too much. And by the end of it, I left without a decoration and my EPR unsigned, which was awkward. My first experience with that. So I understand being slighted on the decoration side, but as you move up the chain, and I started leading airmen, it's a hard conversation to have sometimes when the airman does not deserve a decoration. So I think you got to look on both sides of the coin. Everybody wants a decoration. Everybody wants to be acknowledged. Everybody wants to be the best, and sometimes it's just not the case, so I think that the culture works both ways. I think open, honest communication from the rip. I think that it's horrible if you're saying somebody, hey, you're doing a good job, you feeling the master sergeant billet and you grinding out and you the best of the best. And then, when it's time to recognize that, that doesn't happen. And it happens not in just decoration, it happens in awards, strats, the whole 9 yards. I can recall, I can recall when I was CA coming in at number 7 on the strat thing. I never really cared about this stuff, but coming in number 7, and then awards came out, and I ended up going to the 5th Air Force winning that. And I'm just like, where are the other 7 cats that were grinding? Where are they at? So I understand what you're saying. I just think that open honesty, conversations from the rip will help that along, because not everybody deserves a decoration. And I think that's a harder conversation than just giving a decoration.
No, you're right. You're right.
Makes
and talking seems to be one of the hardest things, depending on the topic that we do. Having those hard conversations. I hear, having that conversation when you're telling someone, we have to give them negative feedback or some not so good feedback. But what's even harder is allowing that person to continue down that road, having being ill-informed about their true performance, because had you told them, they would be better for it. So while it's uncomfortable to have that conversation and tell someone that they're not getting a decoration, that's not a knock to that person's worth, that person's value, and it definitely doesn't mean that they're not going to get promoted, right? In this current culture, it may be a knock on them, but we have to be honest with people. We have to tell them, because they will be better for it. When someone fails that PT test and, they come, I've shared this story on another forum with the team. You can't go to bat for that person when they legitimately failed that PT test, because having to deal with the repercussions of failing a PT test, that's exactly what got this person to get right. They needed that. They needed that code on them. They needed that wake-up call. So when you tell someone, think about how you feel when you get that supposedly negative feedback. You may be hot under the collar a little bit, in your feelings a little bit, rightfully so. We all feel some kind of way, right? But after you think about it, it's you know what? I'm glad you told me that. I'm glad you told me that. And somewhere, unless it's just way in the left field, you kind of know that about yourself already, if you're paying attention to you. And most times at the age where we're at, that's not the first time you've heard that. And if it is, then somebody somewhere along the way has not been telling you the truth. And I go back to what I do is not going to, I would say it's not a matter of life and death, even though y'all act like we killing y'all when y'all have to wait in the waiting room. Saying somebody is as good as they think they are and they are the cream of the crop, and you signing off on all these training records and saying that their EPR is, I mean, they to the moon, and this the best airman that's been in the Air Force since 18 September 1947. And then you put them up and you deploy them and you call them on stage for them to do what you said they could do better than anybody. And they can't. Have you set that person up for failure? And have you set their team up for failure? Because now you have promoted them to a position of leadership. And now they're responsible, not just for themselves, now they're responsible for airmen. And that plays into the role of mental health, stressing other airmen out. You know what I'm saying? Being able to be a good leader. So you have to tell someone, you have to tell them, there is, yes, it's uncomfortable. Get over it. You got on your OCPs. You built for it. You dressed for it. Had a conversation. Have it.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Chief,
Yeah.
and I like to just caveat on what you're saying is that I think that a lot of our issues in the Air Force or things in Air Force are predicated on communication. Mm-hmm. For example, the feedback process. I remember having a young guy supervisor, and he gave a horrible airman, just high marks across the board. And so when it came to my desk, I called him to my office and I said, "Hey man, tell me how you feel." And he was like, horrible this and this. I said, "Well, your credibility's on the line. Anything that your name goes to, your credibility is on the line. So if you're sending this guy up, you're saying this guy's ready to be promoted, this guy's ready to receive a decoration, this guy's ready to be or whatever you think he can be." And I think that everybody wants to be the leader so bad and so fast that we miss out on grooming those individuals. And I think communication is a big part in that because we have to be able to tell them what's right, what's wrong, how to work it. And I hear that, that we, chiefs as our responsibility to change the culture, mm-hmm. but I think it's our responsibility more so to mold the culture, but it's you all's responsibility to change it when it happens right there. You know what I mean? So if you sending me up, I get a good example. I think it was a BTZ. No, it was a awards package, and came up to me, and when it comes up to me, I'm gonna fix it up to make sure I like to win, mm-hmm. right? So I'm gonna make sure it's a winning package. And then you hear gripes and complaints in the background saying, "Well, he didn't even do this, blah 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 blah." Well, you submitted it. So my point is, I mean, it even happens past the squadron. I mean, past the flight level to the squadron. Like he didn't do this and this. Look, if it comes up to me, and I don't know how much in the weeds a lot of people get, but if it comes to me, I'm going to take your word for it as a supervisor that you had those conversations of communication. So I just think that while it is our culture to change it, I don't think it's always fair to just put it on our backs because we have to trust your word too. So what I'm saying is it starts at every level of supervision. And I know you don't learn all that in ALS, and it wasn't happening. You definitely don't learn it in distance course 14s and 15s. So I think it's this experience, and I know everybody doesn't get an opportunity to have a great supervisor.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
Right. So I think that's why you have to work off the humanistic principle of just doing right by people and being honest and open with people, because you know when you see somebody sharp, and when you see somebody who's a slob, right? And you have to be able to communicate that on both ends. So I was adding on to what you said, Chief, just about it's our ability to change the culture. It's our responsibility to change the culture. Yes, I agree that we have to make sure that we hold people accountable to the culture that we do create. But I think that it starts at every level of leadership that you have to actually do the work to change it.
You do.
Hold on. So I think Sergeant Griffin had his hand up also. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm glad for the last 2 points that were made, as far as the holding people accountable, as well as when we were talking about awards, evaluations, etc. I think a few things that we don't do from top down and bottom up all the time is one, transparency. So if we have these meetings with our superiors and our subordinates, we're not always listing the expectations. We might give it overall, but how do you get that superb EPR? If we know supervisors are given that, but it doesn't just go to the supervisor. So if I give my airmen my expectations for me to rate them, my expectations should be in line with the chief and the commanders. But if those expectations aren't given, then I'm only setting that person up for failure because I'm just shooting in the dark with what I think is good enough. But if the commander has his own list of expectations, but no one knows what it is until EPR time comes or award time comes, then we're setting people up for failure. So I think things like that should be transparent. Also, the human factor, like we're talking about, this is what the AFI says. But if we put in, okay, well, the AFI says that you have to accomplish these things. Well, before we throw in what we think is a winning or not winning package, we have to look at, okay, the AFI says you have to do this, this, and this. Did you accomplish that? Cool. Now you're a candidate. But before I go ahead and push you ahead, okay, do I think that this is outstanding? It's a lot of ambiguity in there, and we're weighing too heavy on our opinions versus what the AFI says. And a lot of people don't get recognized because of that human factor of what people think or how people feel versus the actual work being put in. And another thing, I'm glad you mentioned about the PT test, because let's say your first year at a base, you were there for 9 years, your first 6 months, you failed the PT test, but year 8, 9, 10, or the last 8 years that you were there, you killed it. Are we going to deny somebody from that PCS medal because of something that happened 9 years ago, but they worked it out? They had a continuation of excellence throughout the other 8 years, and they were rock stars because of it. But again, that human factor, a lot of times we as leaders deny people from greatness for one mistake, and we forget the fact that learning and being better requires mistakes for us to become better and perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Chief Wesley, go ahead.
No, go ahead, ma'am.
I just wanted to ask, so we've been talking about decoration and policy and culture and transparency with our airmen. One of the things that's come up for me in the past with others is for decorations, they want to include their degrees on their decoration. Right. And so I see the head shaking left and right. But when I dig into the AFI, it becomes this, well, you don't have your master's degree because I don't have my master's degree. So you don't want to put this on my decoration. But it's not clearly stated there in a way, because it does say sustained superior performance. It addresses that officers cannot include their education. Culturally, as an almost 20-year airman, I understand that it's a primary duties related. So how do you suggest to our younger or airmen that are pursuing their education so deliberately that we communicate to them? Or are you saying like, look, it doesn't say it, so if it's important to them, put it on there? What are your thoughts about that? Like
putting your degree on your decoration?
Yes, it's been a real tug of war with folks, because even if it's on their surf and it's on their EPR, they somewhere in their mind, having it on their medal is very important to them. So, I mean, you can put it in a frame on your wall.
I get it. And I'm gonna give you an answer to your question, because this has to stop, right? This has to really stop. And what I'm referring to is the way we used to is so ingrained in our brains that we can't let it go. We cannot let it go. But we are visual, right? It has to make sense to us. We have to see it. It needs to smell right. I need to touch it. I need to feel right. And I need to hear it from the right person for me to believe it, right? So the person who is saying, and I get this one all the time, my degree, put it on my decoration. Where that stemmed from was when we do EFDPs and we limited the number of EPRs that are going to be viewed on the promotion board and EFDPs. Well, depending on when a person got their degree, the board, it may not be as visible. It may not be visible to the board. So in order to get it so that the board can at least consider it, because all of your decorations are there. There's no limit on your decorations, right? So it's like, well, I can put it on my decoration. And so that is a way that airmen have to think, but that's been planted. Somebody told them that. Oh, well, we'll just put it on your decoration since this EPR is the cutoff and it's not going to be considered during the board or the panel. We'll just put it on your decoration. So to fix that, we are going to change how we do the surf, and we're just going to put education back on the surf. We took it off because it was a distractor. Everybody, well, you got your CCF degree. Well, you ain't got no master's. Well, yeah, but you went to Colorado. You went to this school, not that school. Everything is going to be a competition. We're going to try to find something to separate ourselves and make ourselves seem higher and promotable. But I'm telling airmen right now, unless you are not promotable, unless you are not recommended for promotion, you are promotable. We need people who will say, this person is not ready for promotion, update their code. Because I guarantee you that everybody that goes into that testing room, they shouldn't be in there. And we know this. But nobody will check that block. Nobody's going to check that block and put that code on there because nobody wants to be the bad guy because we don't want to have those conversations. You need to tell Airman Snuffy you are not ready for promotion, and you need to tell them why, and do it with love and compassion and with some prospects of having them, you need to grow a little bit more, right? And I'm going to help you get there. This shouldn't be a negative Nancy, violin conversation. No, this is where you are. You're already an airman. You are already in the greatest Air Force. You're already a small percent of those who can serve. You're already great. But we keep putting these things in place for airmen to keep striving towards something, and they're getting further away from the mission. We're getting away from support, defend, the mission. We're getting away from the National Defense Strategy. Tell me what any of this has to do with the National Defense Strategy. Tell me. But we are distracted by these things. And where does it come from? Some of this stuff that younger airmen know, they wouldn't know if my tier, and I'm saying all senior NCOs, somebody had to tell them. So once again, it starts senior NCOs. If we're going to change the culture and we're going to really change it and quit talking about it, let me start seeing some EPRs that's transparency. Everybody is not over to the right. Everybody is not. But that needs to be the norm. It needs to be okay to mark someone down and they not think that their whole life is over. And it needs to it needs to happen. But nobody wants to take that step. Somebody's going to have to take the step. And who? Chief, it's on us. It's on us. We need to make it okay for supervisors to be transparent. We have to create a safe space for them to be like, are you sure he or she is all the way over? Because what I've seen, they're not all the way over. And it needs to be okay.
and making it okay that when we do push them over, I'm sorry, but I just got to say, I've had to have that hard conversation to tell somebody they're not ready for promotion, but trusting the supervisor to know that, right? Because you can say, hey, you know what, they're just meeting, right? But and they do a good job. They meet and they're a meet down, but they are not ready for promotion. And you hear, well, I don't want to put not ready. Don't worry, they'll get weeded out, right? Like their EPRs are too, they'll get weeded out, or the board will see that. And when we were still testing, I'm like, I know some people who can test phenomenally, and they get promoted. And you're like, hey, we should have just put not ready. They're going to be somebody's supervisor,
Yes,
chief, NCOIC, and they're going to PCS. And all of us that are on there, somebody's going to make a phone call because we small enough. They're going to be like, hey, man, you sent us such and such.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that I agree with you that it is on us, like the senior NCO tier, to make that change. And when we are pushing that, we have to make sure that above us, we have that support, because there's a lot of people who are like, I don't want to put not ready and dismantle that member's career. And I'm like, if they ain't ready this year, but they get a must promote next year, then we did our job.
Yep.
I'm out.
That's what needs to happen. And Sergeant Witter, I know it's time. Both of you guys.
I don't like this.
Huh?
Chief Hayes, you came in and you went back out.
No, I hit the wrong button. My bad.
I know the time is getting away, and I do have to get off. Not anytime soon, but it's 2:10. Okay. 2:10. 2:10 is our new deadline. Thank you all for whoever is staying on the line, because this is good conversation here. The decorations, the culture, the policies. We can put policies in place all day. And I'll say it again, culture will trump policy. And we can't put everything in policy. Everything you learned about your craft in the military, you didn't learn it all from a book. Some of it came through because you are picking things up. Some of it came through OJT. Some of it came through experience, right? So everything cannot be put into policy. We are, it's leadership. It's supervisory. It's that human interaction. It's life experiences. It's your morals. It's your values. It's all of those things, right, that are in line with the Air Force and align with our mission, our ultimate mission. And then it goes down from the Air Force mission to your respective MAGCOM, your wing, and to your unit. It needs to go all the way there. Because ultimately what that EPR should be saying is that when we have to send you into a position, you're ready for that position. And if you're not ready, that's okay. Because if you're really not ready and you're not airman material, then it should be more than just a markdown on the EPR. You need to be processed for separation. So unless we're processing you for separation, discharge, or whatever, and you get a markdown on your EPR, that should be okay. And it's going to be a hard change, but it's even harder when you don't get started. We have to get started. When I see commanders who mark EPRs and this say airmen are not ready, I know, at least I believe that commander, that's not an easy decision, because they know that it's impacting families. They know it's impacting pockets. But think about the stress that you're putting on someone to maintain that level of performance when it's not their default, to keep chasing after things. and the impact that they're having on their families. Because when they get home, they feel like they got to go volunteer here, they got to go do this, and they got to do that. They got to join 5, 6, 4, 6, 3, 4, top 3, and they got to go save a baby from a burning building. They got to do all this stuff just to get a promote now. You know what I'm saying? We have to, some of this is self-inflicted, and some of this is a real easy changes, right? One small change that amounts to another small change. It's those little changes that you see, and then you'll start to see the culture change. You'll start to see that change, right? I do want to hit on this one thing about policy, and it's come through a lot since we've been in our current situation. A lot of us are teleworking, and we've had to change a lot of policies within our A1 family. And the word hardship comes up, exception to policy comes up, right? And so we're having the conversations about if most of the requests that are coming through for this particular situation is an exception to policy, then we need to change the policy. It shouldn't be an exception. It should be the policy. And when it comes to the word hardship, we have to look at who's defining hardship. Because to someone who's been in a position for years and years and years, they've seen it, they've baked hardship, they fried hardship, they done boiled it, scrambled it, sauteed it. So a hardship to them, it's like, yeah, everybody got a hardship. In the meantime, a young airman whose family member is dying or suffering, and they're just trying to get to that family member, that's a hardship for them. But to the person who has to make that decision, you know what I'm saying? It's like, yeah, people mamas die all day. You know, we need to redefine who's defining hardship. So when you talk about policy and diversity, these are things that we have to take into account. Who are we talking about? What's their situation? You know, and is the policy flexible enough to cover the majority? If we can't cover all, does it cover the majority of our airmen so that we can continue to keep decision making at the lowest level? Because everything does not have to come to HAF or AFPC and all these other places. You know, and we're seeing that happen now. So, but the diverse aspect, and how will we know what those diverse aspects are unless airmen, you have to speak up. Because another bias that we have is, well, I'm just a 1-striper or a 2-striper, or nobody's listening, or what have you. If you keep your voice strong, we have professional organizations. We have our junior enlisted organization. You may have one at your base, your 5, 6, your top 3, your chiefs groups, and all these other private orgs. There's your voice right there. What are you doing with it? Or are you spending most of your time doing fundraisers? That's your voice right there. Let it explode. Make some changes by using that voice right there. I do want to bring up a particular policy that we currently have in our Air Force, and it regards prohibited activities, right? It's AFI 51-508. And it's paragraph in the following subparagraphs, but it starts at paragraph 3.4. And I'm calling out this particular policy because it says, it regards military personnel must not actively advocate supremacist, extremist, or criminal gang doctrine, ideology, or causes. Now, for some of us, you may think, well, duh. No, but it goes on to say, military personnel must reject active participation in organizations that advocate supremacist, extremist, or gang, ideology. We reject participating in such organizations that uses force and promote violence and all those things, right? Active participation, some examples of that is fundraising, donating, demonstrating, rallying, wearing the colors, clothing. You got a tattoo or a marking, right? Pretty clear. We should stay away from those things, right? Because it does not align with our core values. But then it goes on to say that mere membership in these types of organizations is not prohibited. What are your thoughts on that? In our current environment, given our current environment, considering our current environment, you can be a member of such group.
I'm unsure if this is rhetorical or not, so I'm just going to share how I feel.
It's not rhetorical. You can look it up.
Yeah, and I wrote it down. But I'm feeling a certain type of way about it because with all the things that we are supposed to uphold and enforce and different things, it's almost like other things. It's like we're showing tolerance of it. Now, to be mindful, I'm using my own experiences and projecting my values, but as an inclusive force that has awareness months and that, we have our uniform to prevent us being able to accomplish the mission together, right? Because that's really why we have the uniform, dress and appearance and things. So for me to hear right now today that membership isn't prohibited, I feel like that little line is a loophole to let some of those, I think you talked about vines earlier, a little bit ago, those seeds that still linger. And so to me, if there was something that our Air Force could do in the current climate that our country is in, because we do reflect where we are, that's the line that should be taken out. It should say that membership is also, it's not allowed, because we all have our freedom of speech. I always tell folks, you don't have to like everybody, but professionalism means I don't know, right? Professionalism means if I walk into a room and the four of you, because for example, we have fraternities, sororities, we have schools, we have where people are from, different states and things. If I walk into a room and there's 4 people from Georgia, the greatest state, I shouldn't be excluded because I'm not from Georgia, right? Yep. I shouldn't know that I'm not able to be an airman with you and sit at the table with you. And you're able to have those relationships. And Chief Robinson talked about, and I really like his perspective because to me, it is a shift with things as far as we were told, people have been in for around the time frame that I have, not to be friends with airmen. And admittedly, I've always been different that way. And as I was transitioning out of men group, some of the feedback that I would get from airmen, sometimes they say, wow, Sergeant Witter, thank you for talking to me like a human. And it was so confusing to me because I didn't know how else would I address you, right? Yeah. And then I would walk away and it would sit heavy with me because I couldn't imagine being at work and feeling not like a human with the people I spend most of my day with, because let's be honest, and we all grind kind of hard. So that's a really heavy load, not to feel valued. So how I feel about that line, if there's one thing that we can do as an Air Force to say that we don't tolerate and that there aren't remnants that are allowable, I don't think that it should be there. Or it should be there, but it should say that membership with these type of organizations are not tolerated. Because most places, let's be honest, it contradicts itself. If you're a member of something, you got to pay. The guidance beforehand said that we can't. So what, a payment's not a donation? You know, I'm due for Joint Base Andrews top 3. It's on one of my mini lists. So just by affiliation, I could go down a road, you know, with stickers and symbolism. Sometimes I'm riding behind people's cars because I'm nosy. If I see something that's questionable, I'm like, what uniform they're in? If they're a civilian, I can't do a whole lot. We still have rights on base and things. But as military members, to preserve the integrity of what we're supposed to be doing, it should not be allowed. It should not be tolerated. And it's up to all of us if we know that. And for anyone that I would sit at a table with and like, oh, well, you know, there's that line and AFI, that's a real big red flag for me. So.
Yeah.
Two-word Confederate flag. It shouldn't. I ain't saying you can't have it, but I feel like, again, maybe culturally, being from the South, that's not I just had this conversation with somebody, and they said that was a symbol of Southern heritage, and I was like, that flag does not represent me, and I'm from the South. So, at what point do we say, hey, the AFI says no symbols of said things, and that is a symbol that is used? So, like, at what point do we say, at what point is zero tolerance actually zero tolerance? Right? So we have a policy of zero tolerance for a lot of stuff. At what point is zero tolerance actually zero tolerance?
I'm going to offer you this because the flag comes up, and we've seen what our sister service, the Marine Corps, you know, has decided to do, and to remove that symbol, right? I love to hear both sides of the conversation, and I've heard both sides of it from a few, you know, people. Well, it is a symbol of Southern heritage. It is, you know, this, and it doesn't mean that to me. And if you search your history, you will see that it was it's a symbol for XYZ to some people. I think it was the guy who was the actor on Dukes of Hazzard. I'm going to send you that video so you can listen to what he says. I can't recall everything he said right now, but I saw his point, and it actually changed my view on how I see it. I typically don't get riled up by if somebody wants to, you know, have a Confederate flag or whatever. That's their choice. You know, I like when people are transparent. We're talking about transparency. I like when you're transparent about your dislike, because that's what I'm assuming you think that flag means, right? I'm taking my definition and giving it and impressing it upon you. So I have to have that conversation with you. Hey, did you know that flag? Because it may not mean that to that person. So I hesitate to jump off the top rope on some things like that. But if that person tells me, yes, I am for this, and I don't like people like you, and this is what the flag means, and get out of my yard, I respect you even more, because I don't have to tiptoe around you. I ain't got to tiptoe around you. You said what you said, and hey, I know not to eat your cooking. And that's it. So you have to, I appreciate transparency, even if it's something that I don't necessarily want to hear or like or whatever. But if you don't like me and my kind, tell me. Don't sneak up behind me and be all sneaky and try to sabotage my career or do anything like that. Just do it. And so I offer you to look at, not saying that having the flag or if it's right or wrong or whatever, because there will be a substitute. There is a substitute for the N-word. There will be a substitute. So at what point do you stop chasing the things that, chasing those types of things, because it's always going to be something right after it. But you know what? A fire, that hate, if you ignore it, it dies down, or you change it and reframe it. And you got to look at that person once you find out who they are, not what you assume they are, who they are. And that's a bad grade. You're going to have them. As long as you're not cheating on my life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But that's me. That's me. And where I have thick skin, I have to dial up my compassion, my empathy, my ears, my eyes for other people, because that's not their story. That's not their narrative. And so I have to help them navigate through driving by flags and listening to certain things. And some things we just not going to tolerate. But you get what I'm saying? Okay. So I call that particular policy out because it doesn't align with what I think my Air Force is and what we say it is. And when we say our Air Force, we have to remember we are the Air Force. We are. So if we won't change, we have to change it. So this is something right here that's on my radar to get it changed. Now, just because you take it out of the AFI, do you kill the ideology? Do you kill the membership? No. You're not going to do that. But like my mama used to say, you're not going to do that in my house. I don't care what you do or whatever, but you know that this is not in line. This is not in line with the Air Force that I have grown up in. And I have prided myself on 362618. It doesn't say it line for line anymore, but it says that senior NCOs, we are to understand and explain our leaders' decisions. I can't explain this. So if an airman comes up and says, "Hey, Chief Wesley, why do we allow mere membership?" I can't explain it, and I'm not going to tap dance around it. It needs to come out. Change the culture, take it out, and mean what you say. Delete. It's a Word document. Highlight, delete. As we thank you all again, Sergeant Witter and Sergeant King, for giving me the opportunity to speak. Hopefully this won't be the last time that we talk about this subject. Definitely a lot to dive into. What we have on the horizon coming up is, you may have heard it, the mess dress, allowing mess dress pants for women, so that you have the option for pants or the skirt. We're looking at the child custody assignment. You may have heard Chief Wright talk about that, because the home looks different now than it did years ago. So we have to take those into consideration, right? Once again, it's about talent management and retaining that talent. So we have child custody, joint custody assignment consideration. It's not an automatic approval, but at least we give airmen a voice to at least be able to apply for that. Those are just some of the things that we have coming on the pipe. Definitely hear you about the DSD bit and the strat, that conversation. It does come up. And we're looking at some other things as well regarding evaluations. But once again, culture trumps policy. We have to get after the policy, right? So I'll stay on the line for as long as anybody else wants to stay on the line. If they have any questions, or feel free to email me. Always like talking to you. I like to keep my hands at base level, at all levels really, because it helps keep me informed of what's going on in our force. And so we can affect change where it needs to be. And if you don't tell us that there's an issue, we're going to assume that everything is okay. The current policy works. So your voice matters. Make sure you you use that voice, right? Okay. And that's it for me. Thank you all again. Any questions, anything for me?
So Chief West, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording if people want to hang out. We'll just stay on the line for a couple moments. But I quickly, on behalf of everyone that stayed the whole time, this was a really long chunk of time today. We knew that it would be, we predicted that it would be long, and that's kind of why we projected it to be lengthier and over lunch. But thank you so much for coming. I hope that you're able to join us Tuesday mornings for our Chiefs Power Hour, or Wednesday mornings at 9, same place, same time for our Coffee with Chiefs, which goes a little bit longer than the hour. And then next Thursday, as I mentioned, we're going to have 2 people with very distinct stories about resilience and how they've managed that. So I'll be pushing that out as well. And I'm available by email, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Chief.